This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate what if Naruto was trained by Garp. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Not wasting no time, let's start the story.
As he sat in his office at Marineford, the headquarters of the Marines, Fleet Admiral Kong, a muscular man with dark hair that was slightly graying and styled in a spiked mohawk, complained, "Vice Admiral Garp, why are you so persistent about this? If you showed this much drive when it came to your work, then you'd already make Admiral, hell, maybe even take my job." Garp, a tall, broad, chested man with dark hair and a goatee, picked his nose absently and shrugged. "I'm just fine where I am. Fleet Admiral seems like too much hassle, to tell the truth. Besides, where's the fun in being locked up in here all the time?" he exclaimed while complaining that he was correct. "And I want to take the kid and train him personally. He's already gonna be one hell of a Marine. I want to make him better." Kong couldn't contest that. If they made it through the training, anyone who was given serious instruction by someone like Garp would be a formidable opponent. He glanced at the file on his desk and read the name. Information about one of their cadets was contained in a Marine Officers Academy file, and as Garp mentioned, the boy showed some promise. At the age of 13, he became the youngest Marine cadet in history. His name was Naruto Uzumaki. According to the teacher's notes, the 14-year-old boy was a model student. They meant it when they said youngest. Most waited until they were older, typically between 16 and 18, before joining the Marines. However, if Garp hadn't supported him, this boy would have been held back because he signed up 3 years earlier. When questioned, Garp acknowledged that he had no idea who the boy was, but that he had done it because he had noticed a fire in the children's eyes. When a 13-year-old showed up for basic training, it naturally created quite a stir because they didn't even have his size and had to have some specially made. Since the others were 3 or more years older than the boy, most didn't think he would last long, but he shocked them. They divided them into units, just like they would be in the real world, and sent them to hell and back, just like they do with all new recruits. He breezed through the physical training as if he had been doing it for years. When it came to the unarmed combat they were taught, the blonde was even at the top of his unit. However, when the younger man beat the older recruits, it usually resulted in a lot of bruised egos. They observed that he was far more proficient with knives than with swords. However, he was only able to pass with guns, which was okay because many other people preferred melee over long-range weapons for the same reasons. His leadership abilities were another surprise. Their unit was typically divided into 4 squads, each with a squad leader, for teamwork exercises. Naruto demonstrated innate leadership skills by frequently guiding his team to victory in contests. After completing basic training, the boy had impressed them so much that he was offered a spot in the Officers Academy here in Marineford, where most were typically assigned to a ship or base. "I've seen kids like him, so driven, you know that his drive could be his downfall. There's a point where motivation can go too far and push him to the breaking point," Kong said, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. "I know that you've talked to him. You wouldn't consider apprenticing him otherwise. Why does he want to be a Marine?" Kong then scowled at Garp. Garp became grave as he said to the individual, "He hasn't told anyone else, but years ago, his village was destroyed by pirates. Everything that he had was taken from him, friends, family, his home, everything, leaving him the only survivor. No one knows who did it, well, no one but him, and he refuses to say. I think it's because he wants to be the one to bring those responsible to justice." Naruto Uzumaki used the Academy's gym as a place to kill time by punching a punching bag that was chained to the ceiling near the wall. People around him, whether they were working out or just hanging out, grimaced at the sight of the incredibly heavy bag swinging as much as it did and did their best to ignore him. Given his sky-blue eyes and sun-kissed blonde hair, as well as the 3 scars that resembled whiskers on either side of his face, many of the women would describe him as cute. However, they could see that he would be a handsome man when he was fully grown, and based on his training, he would be well built. He had the bottom of it strike the wall every few punches, but when others used one, it would move a fraction of an inch while compressing in to avoid breaking their hands. As he reflected on that day when he lost it all, Naruto himself hardly noticed anything else. He used to reside on a tiny island town called Konoha, which is now nothing more than a husk, a broken shell, and the site of his family's deaths. Before the deafening sound of a gunshot, all he could recall was the sound of screaming and the voice of the man who had been his grandfather telling him to flee. Everything had been as obvious as day. Hiruzen Sarutobi, an elderly man with gray hair, had been staring at him and shouting for him to run before his body jerked. With a pirate standing behind him, Naruto recalled yelling as the elderly man spat up blood and rolled his eyes back before collapsing to the ground. A face that would be etched in his memory for all time and that he would never forget. Cadet Uzumaki. He paused in the middle of his swing, allowing the punching bag to drop to his fist, and then turned to face one of the instructors, who was wearing a standard white and blue uniform. "Yes?" he asked, and then he smiled, as though he had never had those gloomy thoughts before. "You are needed outside." With a raised eyebrow, Naruto entered the locker room to put on his own outfit. Marine was printed beneath a simplified seagull on the back of a plain white short-sleeved shirt with a blue neckerchief. Marine was printed across the front of the hat he wore on his head, and his pants were plain dark blue. As he left the gym and entered the academy's grounds, he discovered that he was by himself before nightfall. A few seconds later, Naruto woke up and sat up, rubbing his head, where a huge knot was growing, while lying in the grass. He moaned, What hit me?" and then noticed a cannonball a short distance away. He was still sitting on the ground when he heard a voice behind him say, "That was lesson 1. He turned to see Garp standing there grinning and with his arms behind his back. "Always be alert and how to dodge, but it looks like you need more training, and that's so." Naruto paled when he saw him carrying 2 more while strapping a big crate full of them to his back and extending his arms out from behind him. "Time for a retest. Oh, and I almost forgot to tell you, you've been assigned to me as my new apprentice and given the rank of petty officer. Congratulations." After blinking, Naruto said, "Ah, cool, thanks, I think." Naruto went pale, and Garp's smile darkened. An hour later, Naruto was panting as Garp laughed loudly and gave him a back pat, each blow almost taking his breath away. "You did good today, kid," the man exclaimed, ignoring the irate expressions of those around him because of the cannonballs that were lodged in houses, trees, and roadways. "You'll be one hell of a Marine, kid, one hell of a Marine," Garp smirked as he looked at the breathless teenager. 2 years later, Garp was sleeping on his ship, snoring loudly beneath a deck cannon, a snot bubble growing and shrinking with every breath. Not because of a formal directive or anything, but because he felt like stopping there for the time being. They were stationed in Loungetown. As he ran out onto the deck, one of his men yelled, "Vice Admiral." This actually woke the man up, causing him to hit his head on the cannon above them, denting it. "Huh?" He rubbed his eye and yawned. "Sir, it's Ensign Uzumaki." Upon hearing his apprentice's name, he snapped to attention and gave the man a stern look. "He's fighting someone, sir." "No, he's killing him," he exclaimed. "What?" "I don't know why, but we were patrolling and he suddenly tackled someone, sir. On one can stop him. He's already knocked out 5 men that tried to pull him off of whoever that is." Garp only needed to hear that before he rushed to find Naruto and jump off the ship. He found 3 squads of Marines attempting, with little success, to stop the blonde and pull him away from the person he had been beating. He accomplished this with ease by following the sound of yelling people. The blonde fell to the ground like a puppet without strings after he pushed his way through the crowd and slammed his fist back into the back of his head. He almost dropped the 16-year-old in shock when he lifted him off the ground. The man Naruto had been beating was severely injured. His eyes were swollen, his nose was broken and bleeding, and his lips were both busted and swollen. Nevertheless, he recognized the face of a man he had fought multiple times before but seemed to never catch, even with the blood, bruises, and swelling. Naruto would be fantastic, he knew, but keeping his gaze fixed on the man below, he yelled to the Marines, "Alert HQ, Goldie Roger has been taken into custody." The man known as the King of Pirates sat in chains on the floor of his underground jail cell, counting down the hours until his own execution. It had been almost a year since he was captured. In fact, the official 1-year anniversary of his capture by an ensign was just a few days away. He had spent the majority of the year shipped off to Impel Down, but now he was back in Loungetown, where he was born and, ironically, where he would be executed. Not too long ago, Garp had stopped by to tell the Marine about his impending baby and ask him to look after it. Even though Garp was still a Marine and his enemy, he was a man of honor and would comply with his request, so he had truly enjoyed their brief conversation. Any woman connected to him would be killed for that reason alone, as Garp had stated, but they both held the belief that a newborn child was sinless. Tap. 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 Roger arched an eyebrow when he heard footsteps and waited because it was still too early for them to bring his last meal of prison slop and it wasn't time for him to pass away. However, it was a young, blonde Marine. The same one who caught him and severely beat him, rather than one of the prison guards who approached his cell. Naruto turned to glare at the man and bit out, "Goldie Roger, I've been hunting you down for years." Roger's eyes widened as he got a good look at him. Minato. No, it can't be, he thought, blinking. Years waiting to make you pay. Years training to make you suffer for what you and your crew did. But now you're in this cell. Naruto, wearing a white suit, blue shirt, and the Marine great coat with the symbol for justice written on the back hanging over his shoulders like a cape, grabbed one of the bars and glared at it before turning that glare on Roger. "Kid, who are you? You don't remember me?" Naruto yelled. How about Konoha? How about that old man you shot? How about every single fucking villager you and your damn crew slaughtered that day nearly 10 years ago? Roger realized what he was talking about and told him, you don't know what you're talking about, kid. We weren't the ones attacking. Don't you fucking lie to me. I saw you there, Pirate King. I've burned your face into my memories for years, but now, you're stuck in there and I can't do anything about it, snarled Naruto, who was holding onto the bar. He heard someone open the door to the death row holding cells. I may not be able to kill you myself, but I'll take solace in the fact that today is the day you die. May you burn in hell for what you've done. Pirate activity surged in the 2 years after the death of Pirate King Gold D. Rogers. The man was cursed by Marine brass everywhere because, with his last words, he ushered in the so-called Great Age of Pirates, in which people searched everywhere for his secret treasure, known as One Piece. The Marines were forced to work harder as a result of the rise in piracy, where they either succeeded or failed. Ensign Uzumaki Naruto received a rare double promotion from ensign to lieutenant and achieved the de facto rank of captain while aboard Vice Admiral Garp's ship for apprehending the notorious pirate Gold D. Roger. Garp claimed to have done this to give the blonde some experience in ship command, but many people thought he was just trying to relax on the ship and let his apprentice handle all the work he should be doing. Because of his remarkable record of mercilessly taking down pirate crews and refusing to be bought like others had in the past, he stayed a lieutenant for the few months before being promoted once more. Aside from his new role as lieutenant commander, he continued to hunt down pirates who were unlucky enough to be spotted by a Jolly Roger. Garp shouted from below deck, "Oi, where'd my donuts go?" before climbing to the top deck. His ship was much larger than a normal marine ship, due to his rank of course. It had many sails with each mast shaped like bones with dog paws while the sails itself had marine symbols painted on them. The figurehead at the front of the ship was even shaped like a dog's head with a bone in its mouth, giving the whole ship a canine theme. It was armed with many large cannons that would easily overwhelm a normal ship, but if one were to ask, they'd find out that they were hardly used during Garp's command. The reason being that Garp liked to just throw cannonballs himself, so much so that they installed a convoy belt to supply him with a steady supply. But with Lieutenant Naruto calling the shots, some were actually used now. Many Marines jumped out of the way of the charging Vice Admiral as he ran down the halls of his ship and out onto the deck, nose faring like a raging bull's before he caught sight of his target and reared back with his fist as he charged once again. His target, Naruto Uzumaki, who was standing at the bow of the ship wearing his marine greatcoat like a cape over top of his white and blue suit. As if sensing the attack, Naruto dodged Garp's swing, allowing him to punch the railing which exploded like a cannon had hit it. "What did you do with my donuts, brat?" he roared while trying to hit the blonde over and over again, busting holes in the deck and breaking things. "I told you about messing with them and all I could find is that ramen crap." The blonde froze before growling, "How dare you call my ramen that?" He yelled back while throwing a punch of his own just as Garp did the same. Both punches met and both men flew back, Naruto bouncing 3 times on off of the deck before hitting a cannon while Garp fell to his ass, both without a scratch. "Getting better, kid." The Vice Admiral laughed while standing up before turning serious, "But what did you do with them?" Laying on his back with both legs over the cannon, Naruto groaned, "You ate them all, old man, don't you remember?" Garp started picking his nose. "Oh yeah, I did, didn't I?" He mused, making his crew face fault. "Oh well, looks like we're going to a town for more." The large man then turned to the damaged sections of his ship and then to the nearby Marines. "You guys fix this, I'm gonna take a nap." Ignoring the crew's muttering about having to clean up after him, he walked by Naruto and grabbed him by the foot. "But first, I gotta talk to you, come with me," he exclaimed before pulling him along behind him, uncaring if the 18-year-old hit his head on the steps as they walked up to the back of the ship, which was higher than the front. Standing on the deck a couple days later, Naruto waited for Garp to arrive. The other day, Garp had said that he had completed what training he could give him in Tekai and that he'd be giving him a sort of final exam today. While many would be excited, he found himself a bit worried due to Garp's way of going way too far and over the top. He wouldn't be surprised if. Before he could finish it though, he sensed an attack coming and instantly activated Tekai just as 3 cannons went off, all fired at him and bouncing off, leaving him unharmed as the following wave of smoke washed over him. Tekai was a part of a martial arts style known as Rokushiki, or 6 styles, and while Garp didn't know them all, he himself knew Tekai, which was how to harden the user's muscles to that of solid iron, which would nullify damage taken from an attack. But one drawback was that he couldn't move while it was active. "Congrats, kid, you pass, and as a gift, I've got you someone that can teach you more." Naruto looked at the man with a raised brow. "You're pawning me off to someone already?" "Well, my way of saying it sounded much nicer, but yeah, Besides, I can't teach you anything else. You're like a sponge. But don't worry, I got the perfect person lined up to teach you. Okay, so what are you gonna be doing while I'm gone? Garp stuck his pinky up his nose boredly. Don't know really, maybe go and visit my friend over in Fuchsia Village or take a vacation. He said with a shrug, almost feeling bad about lying, but how could he tell the kid that he was going to see Portgas de Rouge, lover to Gold D. Roger and mother to said man's son? The woman was dying and he had given his word to protect the boy. It was sad that he just may have to lie to protect him from the blonde since he didn't know if his hate would pass on to the son. Naruto shrugged, okay, well who's going to teach me and what about my hockey training? Garp actually smirked, scaring the blonde. As it turned out, he actually didn't have anything to fear at all from his new sensei. If anything, he liked her training better than Garp's. Her name was Suru, an elderly vice admiral known and feared as the Great Tactician. She was also known for her Woshu no Mi, a paramecia-type devil fruit that literally made her able to wash and hang people or objects out to dry as if they were clothing, turning them flat and malleable like clothes. She was a shorter pale blonde woman with wrinkles but had the wisdom and pride of a veteran marine. She taught him Soru, another part of Rokushiki which allowed him to move at extremely high speeds in order to dodge or attack. The elderly vice admiral also taught him more about both his Kenbunshoku hockey as well as Busashoku hockey. Kenbunshoku or observational hockey allowed the user to sense the presence of others even if they were hidden from view or too far to see. Like with most training, he took to it with gusto and was soon working on predicting an opponent's moves before they even made them. Busashoku or armament hockey allowed the user to create a force similar to invisible armor around them to defend against attacks much like his Tekai would, but the difference was that he was able to use it to attack and augment attacks, project it as brute force, or even imbue it into weapons to increase its effectiveness. Another plus was that it allowed him to bypass the powers of a devil fruit user, meaning that he could hurt someone that could normally brush off normal attacks thanks to one of those fruits. Suru, being older, had been stationed at Marineford, so for the time, he'd been staying there to train. At first, he didn't like being cooped up there, but a certain something made it more enjoyable for him. She had been a student at the officers' academy when he first met her. She had slammed into him while running and yelled at him about watching where he was going despite the fact that she had ran into him while he'd been standing still. After the yelling match that ensued, one thing led to another and they found themselves engaged in a rather rough round of intercourse back in the small apartment he'd rented during his training. She was a confident and mischievous woman the same age as him but was a promising student. After class she would meet him every once in a while just to work out their stress together and hang out. Neither wanted a romantic thing, just one of those friends with benefits relations. She had the weirdest hairstyle but she'd been a freak in the bed. Her name was Belmir. He'd remember it all right, that and more. She graduated later that year and he hated to see her go, but the night before she left, damn what a send-off. He later learned that a year later, around when he was 20, she managed to survive a battle between her crew and some pirates, ending in both sides losing the fight. She retired not long after and the last time he heard from her was that she was happy and had adopted 2 little girls. Naruto Uzumaki, 38, was lounging on his ship, a slightly larger than average marine vessel equipped with both the standard deck cannons and the ones concealed behind hatches on the front and each side. He was wearing orange swim trunks and had his arms behind his head. A pair of binoculars and an empty bowl of what appeared to be ramen were sitting on the wood deck next to him, and he was soaking up the sun. "Do you mind?" he hummed without opening his eyes. "I'm trying to relax here," he said, before a shadow obscured him and blocked the sun. The shadow didn't move. Instead, something fell and struck his head, but he yelled as it rolled off his forehead and onto someone's foot because of his hockey training and Takai. When Naruto opened his eyes after recognizing the voice, he was shocked to see Garp standing there, or hopping in place, with his foot in his hand. When he saw the now white-haired but still rugged-looking old man, he cried out in surprise, "Garp, what are you doing here?" Garp looked around and laughed. "Who would have thought that you'd hang out at a place like this for your time off?" The man calmed down as his foot stopped hurting. "Well, brat," he said, before flashing a big, proud smile. "Sengoku sent me to find you and your crew. Something about you taking too long on your vacation or something like that," Garp said. Naruto stood up and joined him. His ship and Garp's were anchored a long way from an uninhabited island. While uninhabited islands were not unheard of, they were typically found in the calm belt, 2 bodies of water that have no current or even wind, or the Grand Line itself because of the risks associated with both. However, they were in the East Blue, which is renowned for being the birthplace of Gold D. Roger despite being the world's weakest sea. After noticing something, the 75-year-old man asked, "Hey where's your crew?" Naruto said, "Training," without pausing, almost suspiciously. which caused Garp to raise an eyebrow and glance around once more. He and Naruto were the only people on deck, and he was unable to hear the sound of swords clashing or guns firing, such as when a crew member was instructed to spar or practice target practice. In fact, he might have thought it was a ghost ship if he hadn't noticed the blonde tanning on the deck from his ship, which dwarfed the blondes. What kind of training? Without responding, Naruto turned to face the island after hearing something in the distance. The distance was too great for him to see on his own, so he took the binoculars from the deck beside the chair and peered out to see a group of Marines fleeing from a group of Kung Fu dugongs, which were notorious for their Kung Fu and were 3 feet tall and resembled seals or walruses. Garp strained his ears and could only make out their cries of "Mercy, Naruto. Sama. Please assist us," and "Boss, save us." While he was lounging on the ship, Garp was shocked to see that Naruto had sent his men up to an island where Kung Fu dugongs lived. "How are dugongs in the East blue? Aren't they from the coasts near Alabasta?" Garp asked. Naruto sighed, "I guess, but I guess they come down here every now and then, kinda like a migration." When Garp saw one man being captured and thrashed by the animals, he hummed and laughed, saying, "Violent little things, aren't they?" "Of course not, they're actually pretty peaceful until you challenge them," the blonde said, shaking his head. "I came out here a few years back and kinda disturbed their mating rituals by accident, but after beating them all they became my loyal minions." He laughed, which caused Garp to erupt in laughter. Dugongs were intelligent, honor-bound creatures who, according to their code of honor, had to adopt the mindset of the person who had defeated them. Additionally, they had some alphas, who were more skilled at Kung Fu than the others, which helped them gain their own fanbase. In the event that the Master Dugong was defeated, that code also applied to them. He continued to scan the area and discovered that, in addition to the group attempting to flee, a smaller group of animals was being restrained by a lone Marine. "Oh ho!" he exclaimed. "Looks like that girl right there is holding her own," he said. "It must be my Master Chief Petty Officer, Tashigi," he thought, grinning, as he crossed his arms and realized who it was. "She's skilled with a sword, but that's why I had her leave it here," he said. Naruto leaned on the railing and laughed as he shot back. "Hasn't stopped her, looks like she's made herself a wooden sword out of a tree limb. She's resourceful, I'll give her that, but you said that Sengoku sent you, right? I guess it's about time to go home anyway. You coming too?" Knowing that Fleet Admiral Sengoku would be irritated, Garp shrugged and said, "Nah, I'm gonna wait a while before I go back, maybe take a vacation myself. Oh, and by the way, I never got to congratulate you on your last promotion. Youngest Vice Admiral in history, I always knew you'd make it. Too bad my foolish grandsons never followed your lead." Garp had told Naruto hundreds of times over the years about Luffy and Ace, how he encouraged them to grow up and become strong Marines like them, and how he trained them even more. Naruto nodded slowly. However, both had succumbed to the lure of piracy, Luffy because he aspired to become the next Pirate King and emulate his hero, the Yonko known as Red-Haired Shanks, and Ace because he believed that life offered more freedom. In order to let the Marines on the island know that they could return and to let the Dugongs know that they could stop kicking ass, he reached under his chair, took out a pistol with a long barrel, pointed it up into the air, and fired a flare into the sky. "Hey, you still testing those special thingies you got from Vegapunk?" The top scientist working for the Marines was Dr. Vegapunk. He was renowned for his efforts to uncover the uses and mysteries of sea stone, the workings of Devil Fruit's powers, and numerous other scientific breakthroughs that were allegedly 500 years ahead of the state of the art. Since Naruto spent more time in the field than most, Vegapunk had contacted him years ago to ask if he would occasionally test out some special equipment. A more recent experimental weapon designed to be used against Devil Fruit users was one example. When pirates gained powers from the fruits, they already had cuffs and nets made of sea stone to catch and hold them, but occasionally they were simply too fast or could escape before either could be used. Thus, the good doctor devised a more ruthless solution. When his crew returned to the boat after using the row boats to get to and from the island, he cried out, "I haven't had a reason to use them yet." They were all filthy and gaunt, with the majority of them battered and bruised from their training, torture. Everyone moaned in agony, though it sounded more like irritation, as the person said, "Okay everyone, get cleaned up and take a rest, in the morning we're heading to Marineford." With his finger in his nose as usual, Garp hummed, "You know, I'd have them go on and work through the pain," causing the men and women of Naruto's crew to sing praises about their commanding officer, praising him for being kind to them and kissing his ass in general. He grinned and said, "I would, but I figure that Sengoku can wait another day so that my crew can rest." The other vice admiral smiled back before laughing once more. He waved his crew off, saying, "You're all dismissed for the rest of the day. but be ready to sail in the morning. The crew had not yet left, waiting for their orders. After giving him a stuttering salute, they all limped off to recuperate for the remainder of the afternoon and night. They would be extremely sore in the morning, but it was preferable to them dozing off while on duty and then making a mistake. The childlike old man said to him, "Well kid, looks like I'll be going now," after the crew had gone below deck. "Oh, and before I forget, you still have that pet fur ball of yours running around ship? I got a score to settle with it for last time." "Yeah, Hugh is still here and no you can't hurt her," he deadpanned, staring the man in the eye as the blonde perspiration fell. A few years ago, while on vacation in the Grand Line, he came across Q, a fox that was about the size of a small horse. She attacked him out of hunger while he was strolling through a forest, but she was easily defeated. He was initially startled by the fox's size but dismissed it as one of the many odd creatures that lived along the Grand Line. However, you can only imagine how shocked he was when the fox abruptly shrank to the size of a small kid and began to weep about how hungry he was and how little there was on this foolish island. She ate the rare zone devil fruit, which turned out to be one of the few items she had managed to locate, even though it tasted awful. From what he could deduce, it had transformed her into a spirit fox, or Iki. Kitsune, with the power to change her size and speak, just as a legendary spirit fox was supposed to. He had a suspicion that she might be able to do more in the future, but they hadn't found out yet. But let's get back to the narrative. She essentially pleaded with him to take her with him after feeding her, saying she would not interfere and would do everything in her power to assist. Even claiming that she would hardly occupy any space at all, she demonstrated this to him by becoming as small as a newborn kid and fitting into his hand. Before revealing her mouth full of razor sharp teeth and equally sharp claws, she jumped and grew even larger, bolstering her argument that she could assist him in fighting. She followed him around and served as a kind of guard when he entered towns after they made port, but she was rarely required to participate in combat. One day, however, she demonstrated her worth by ambushing Garp as he attempted to test Naruto by surreptitiously approaching him to check on his training. He was about to grab the teenager when Q appeared out of nowhere and dug her teeth into his butt, causing the older man to scream aloud and hold on tight while he ran around like a chicken with its head severed and burned. Garp had been attempting to exact revenge for the past few years, but had failed either when Q outwitted him or when Naruto was present. It was a coin toss as to who would win the fight and, indirectly, the argument because, as you can see, very few people could challenge Garp and have a chance of winning. Even fewer had enough respect for the man to listen to what they had to say to him when they tried to talk him out of something. Naruto was one of the few who could do that. Garp snipped, "Fine then," saying, "Didn't want to see that mangy furball anyway," before turning around and pouting like a child and heading back to his ship. Naruto said, Yeah, I'll see you later, old man," as he waved goodbye. Bye brat. Marineford was more than just the Marines' headquarters. In fact, the base at its core was merely a base, and the buildings around it served as a bustling community for the Marines' families. A town could trade and ship things in and out that they might not be able to make otherwise, like luxury goods and the like, and it had everything a town needed to prosper and be self-sufficient. Since they had a sizable standing force at their disposal and the most senior Marines, including the admirals and vice-admirals, were frequently present for various reasons, the families there accepted the permanent military presence on the crescent-shaped island, which was built like a fortress but was still a city. In fact, they felt safer there than anywhere else. In the middle of the city was a huge stone base with a tower that towered proudly in the sky. It contained the offices of all the Marines' most powerful men as well as the fleet admiral, who, somewhat surprisingly, chose to have an office many floors below the admirals and vice-admirals rather than on the top floor. And that's where Naruto was standing at the moment. To put it mildly, it was impressive. When he was promoted by the former fleet admiral Kong, he had a shark in a large aquarium that was built into the wall behind his desk, but the shark was released because the tank was too small for it. There were a few paintings on the walls and a few bookcases with random books on them, but nothing on his desk seemed particularly personal, save for some blank papers and forms he needed to review. Though younger than Garp, Sengoku was a tall, strong man who was reputed to be equally tough. He was wearing a marine cap, and the top portion of his big afro was covered by a life-size seagull figurine. In addition, the man wore a pair of black circle-rimmed glasses on his nose, a trimmed mustache above his lip, and a long, braided beard that reached his belt. Like all officers, he wore a marine greatcoat, which seemed more royal and unique than a normal one and represented his rank and status. Additionally, he was the only one wearing his gold and white admiral uniform, to which all of his medals were pinned at the chest. "You called for me?" Sengoku nearly thought the blonde was a younger Garp based on the way he spoke to him when he looked up and saw him standing there smiling. Though Naruto occasionally behaved exactly like the man who trained him, the blonde would become serious when necessary, and Garp was already awful enough. That thought chilled him. He wasn't sure what he would do if a young Garp clone appeared. He would most likely send him to a base in the middle of nowhere in the farthest corner of the globe. First off, why didn't you answer any of the calls we sent you through your den? Den Mushi? He began, clearing his throat. A den. Den Mushi is a unique species of snail that can use radio waves to telepathically communicate with one another. By attaching buttons and receivers to them, they were able to use them for communication with other animals. Surprisingly, this doesn't even faze the animals. In fact, the majority of them appear bored by the entire situation. Naruto had one in his quarters because, as a vice marine, he needed to be accessible, and most marine ships were equipped with them. Why is something wrong? Naruto shrugged and said to the man, I was on vacation so I decided to give it one too, which caused him to perspire. The man's face lit up. No, but your vacation ended and you were supposed to return a week ago. Looking shocked, the blonde said, Really? Wow, I thought it was 2 weeks ago, I must be running a little slow hee. The fleet admiral breathed deeply and calmly, Anyway, I'm sending you on a mission. Naruto became serious. As you know, the Shichibukai are given a pardon for their former actions and have their bounties rescinded in exchange for 1/10 of whatever they make, even if it's from stealing and such. They must also perform certain tasks should they be told. I know this. What's with the history lesson? I'm getting to that. Now, as you know, we gave Boa Hancock, captain of the Kuja Pirates and Empress of Amazon Lily, a position in the Shichibukai a few years back. But recently, she's stopped giving us the 10% of her treasure and we know that her crew's been busy pillaging. Recently, we sent a crew to find out why, but we've yet to hear back. Already determining what the man wanted him to do, Naruto said, So you want me to go and find out what happened to the Marines you sent and what their problem is? Sengoku replied, With your skills I'm certain that you can handle the situation and if needed, fight your way out. Now I don't want this to turn into a war with the Kuja no matter how much we of he Marines outclass them, so handle this carefully. Of course, careful is my middle name, explained the blonde with a smile and a nod. Yeah, directly after, sometimes but not always, the man hummed, brushing the blonde aside. Amazon Lily. As they prepared to depart, Naruto stood on the deck of his ship, winced at the loud voice, and leaned away from it, sticking his pinky in his ear and pouting childishly to the younger woman next to him. OWW, I'm not deaf, Tashigi-chan. Tashigi was a 21-year-old Marine who had been working as a kind of protege and assistant to him. She chose to wear her civilian clothes instead of a uniform because she felt that it limited her movement when she used her katana. She had dark brown eyes behind a pair of box-frame glasses and dark, chin length, dark blue, almost black hair. Even Naruto finds her attractive because she frequently wears tight jeans, button-up shirts with floral patterns, and a specially designed belt to hold her sword. Despite her skill and promise with her sword, she was incredibly awkward and frequently forgot to wear her glasses, which made for some amusing moments aboard the ship. Despite being a Master Chief Petty Officer, she was admired by all the men for her swordsmanship and beauty. Even the few higher-ranking crewmen paid attention to her advice and were content to follow it, as long as it didn't conflict with the Vice Admiral, that is. As he watched the men haul their supplies and store them below deck, she frantically informed him, but it's in the comm belt, a breeding ground for sea kings. Then he pointed to a group carrying a crate full of ramen labeled property of Vice Admiral Uzumaki, with another sign taped to it that read, touch it and be charged with treason. He shrugged. So what? She said. So what? So what? Then he interrupted her, saying, Tashigi-chan, have you forgotten that our ships are outfitted with sea stone on the hull? A sea king won't be able to sense us while we sail. Oh yeah, how silly of me, Tashigi said, blushing and rubbing the back of her head as she laughed nervously. The men gasped, but she was really thinking, damn it, how can I embarrass myself like that in front of Naruto? Sama. How can I ever impress him now that he must think I'm such a loser? The fact that it only worked when they were moving, the Sea Kings would eventually detect them and come to investigate if they sat still for an extended period of time, was not mentioned by Naruto. Sengoku sat in his office and reviewed the file he had on Vice Admiral Uzumaki Naruto. It was a highly classified file that contained the man's known information, which could cause problems if it were to leak. However, since his home village had been destroyed, Naruto's only real information was about his skills, unlike most, which would include family information, home villages, next of kin, and so forth. As demonstrated by Garp's occasional small surprise tests, his Kenbunshoku Haki had been trained to the point where, if he was serious, he would be able to anticipate and counterattacks before they were launched. However, when he wasn't, it was typically to the point where he could sense an attack and dodge with his eyes closed. He was equally impressive with his Busashoku haki. In order to cut almost anything, even if his blade missed by an inch or two, he frequently used a pair of hidden blades and imbued them, making it appear as though a blade of wind had cut the target. Even though his level wasn't quite as high as Garp's, it was still quite amazing, particularly when he started hurling cannonballs at Garp recently. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on his door, and he called the person inside. "Ah, sir, we got this package for you in the mail," the Marine replied uncertainly. "I'm afraid that it doesn't have a return address, but it's got the okay from security." He was staring at a brown paper, wrapped, twine, tied box when he told the man to bring it in. To his surprise, a birthday card was inside when he opened it. He muttered, "What the, it's not my birthday," and shrugged. Security had examined it and found no evidence of poison or bomb, and besides, he enjoyed cake. He opened the box and was astounded by what he saw. He was there, having sex with his small pet goat while naked. It was really offensive, but it was delicious. He had them tell him the recipe, and if he ever found out who made it, he would have them arrested and put to death by firing squad. Vice Admiral Naruto and his crew were waiting for a Kuja ship to arrive while anchored in the center of the calm belt, 2 miles from the island known as Amazon Lily. Since their agreement said that no marine vessel would approach within 3 miles of their home as long as Hancock was employed by them, they were aware that they could see them from their island and would soon be there to greet them. He made them approach in order to attract their attention. The crew as a whole was uneasy because of the tales of the Kuja women, afraid of monsters that turned people into stone by wearing human skins. All of the ship's marines were on deck with rifles, and Tashigi was holding Naruto and her katana. The lady exclaimed, "Naruto, what are you doing?" as she saw him lying on his lawn chair, shirtless, in his orange swimsuit, with his 2 weapons on the floor beside it, sunglasses over his eyes, and sunscreen all over his body, which made him look shiny. To get rid of those negative thoughts, she shook her head. He smirked and said, "Why don't you join me? I'll even help you put your sunscreen on if you like." His smirk disappeared as his head jerked to the side, gazing out at the sea. "Tanning, what do you think I'm doing?" he deadpanned. She blushed and began to speak, but before a huge fish emerged from the water, the ship trembled, frightening the crew. It had solid white eyes, pointed teeth on its lips, and darker, colored fins. Before they all began shooting, someone yelled, "Sea King," but it didn't help. They screamed that they were doomed as it turned and bared its teeth at them, bullets and cannonballs bouncing off its flesh like rubber. Vice Admiral Naruto was sailing through the air with his twin blades in hand, both of them glowing a blue-white color as he approached the monster. Tashigi cried out, "It's gonna eat us," before an orange streak flew past her, shattering her hopes. It let out a great roar and advanced to crush them, but halted when a huge wound appeared across its face, rupturing its left eye and cutting the right side of its mouth. Another wound then destroyed the right eye and cut the left side of its mouth. Before its left and right halves split apart and plunged into the sea, the center of its head slid apart in a dazzling white flash. After a moment of silence over the seas, Naruto smirked and landed on the deck, his short swords crimson with blood. "That, Tashigi, is why I do not fear the Sea Kings," he said. The Marines on board were relieved when their commanding officer killed the attacking beast by himself as the ship steadied itself from the waves created by the now dead Sea King. Some of the sword users even cried out in delight at witnessing the Vice Admiral using his 2 weapons. Looking at the 2-bladed weapons, one of his friends exclaimed, "Amazing! It's the first time I've ever seen Vice Admiral Naruto use his weapons in person." Even the weight of the 2 weapons was the same, if the rumors about them were accurate. With a 5-inch handle and blades that were 9 inches long, they resembled short katana, like swords, and were slightly longer than a foot. Unlike a katana, however, the guard between the blade and handle was curved down to the bottom of the grip, with a series of sharpened points that resembled teeth running the length of the grip. The Blades of Absolute Justice, or something similar, was the name given by the pirates who were able to witness them in action because Naruto never bothered to give them an official name and the forger never gave them one. As everyone stared at him, Naruto dropped the blades that were stuck in the deck next to him and went back to his lawn chair. He then sat down again and adjusted his sunglasses as if nothing had happened. After a minute, he yelled, "Everyone, stop staring at me and watch out for the Kuja. I know I'm sexy." That jolted everyone out of their reverie, and everything appeared to return to normal. However, some of the sailors had to clean the ship's side, which was now covered in Sea King blood. Tashigi stood near him and grumbled, "Surely they've noticed us. How long are they going to make us wait?" The brunette sang, "They have, but if I'm right, they decided to wait for us to be attacked by a Sea King to see how we handled it." One of the Marines using his binoculars to observe the waters exclaimed, Naruto. Sama. I see a ship approaching us from the island, it's being pulled by a pair of Yuta. Took them long enough, the blonde hummed. The Yuta were a fierce and extremely toxic kind of sea snake. In fact, they were so toxic that sea kings avoided them out of concern that they would get bitten. They were somehow domesticated by the Kuja pirates, who used them to push their boat through the calm belt and to ward off sea kings. After getting to his feet, Naruto gathered his weapons and proceeded to the back of his ship to his room, also known as the captain's cabin. There, he changed out of his bathing suit and put on his white dress pants and boxers before throwing them on the bed. Just before they began to move and his pet's red furry head emerged to look around before spotting him, a voice said, "Ah, what the?" from the ball of blankets next to his headboard. "Why'd you throw that at me?" He smiled and said, "I'm sorry about that, Q," before grabbing a blue dress shirt off a hanger, putting the tail of it into his pants, and putting it on his white shoes. "I didn't realize you were sleeping there," he said. "What's going on?" The fox complained as she emerged from the sheets she had buried herself in to sleep. He tied his shoes, got up to get his white blazer, and told the fox, "Meeting with the Kuja, got to find out what happened to our marines and collect some money." "Aren't they the snake-using tribe?" she asked, growling when he nodded. "I hate snakes." She waited until he put it on before jumping onto his shoulder. He picked up his great coat on the way back and stopped to slide his short swords into concealed sheaths inside his blazer. "Well, if push comes to shove, we might just have to fight them," he told her. When he put on the coat like a cape, Q shrank even more and leapt up onto his head. Armed for battle and fully outfitted for duty, she had previously spotted a holstered gun concealed close to the small of his back. "I almost hope they do try to fight us," she said. "I haven't had a good fight since we took down those dog pirates." Naruto hummed. They defeated one of the 3 Inuzuka pirate captains a while back. Since Q was the youngest, it wasn't a particularly difficult battle, but he enjoyed taking on the captain's combat. Trained pet dog. The captain had been a younger man named Kiba Inuzuka, the son of Sume Inuzuka, an infamous pirate captain that men feared worldwide, and the brother of Hana Inuzuka, a well-known pirate captain. He had handed the man over to a transport, and the last he heard, Sume and Hana were able to free their brother from captivity while he was traveling to Impel Down. Kiba reportedly attempted to place a price on his head before deciding to remain on his mother's ship after discovering who the man who killed him was. However, those were rumors. It was only a minute before the Kuja pirates arrived alongside them as he made his way back to the forward deck. Their flag featured a skull in the middle of a snake spiral. It was a simple galleon with a pink mansion-like structure in the center. Paddle wheels were installed in the back of the ship for when they weren't using the Yuta, or perhaps to air them. Who else really knew? The sails had a deep red color and were painted with the Jolly Roger on the front sail, a smaller sail above it, and a medium-sized sail behind it. The Kuja pirates were on their deck, which was roughly the same height as theirs, just like them. However, while the Marines were brandishing their guns or swords, the Kuja gazed at them icily, with some brandishing their trademark snake weapons, which were functional bows. Each Kuja wore a bikini top and bottom in a variety of colors and materials. While some females were large, muscular, and overweight, others were small and lean, but they were all prepared for battle. One of the females, who wore tiger fur and had short dark hair, exclaimed, "You sure have guts, dropping anchor right in the middle of this monster." "Phil C. Not only that, but you're breaking our treaty, you Marines shouldn't be within 3 miles. As he approached the railing with Q perched on his shoulder and staring at the numerous snakes, Naruto yelled, "We are well within our rights to be here. You Kuja have broken the treaty first, your Empress status as a Shichibukai is in danger, and as you know, as long as she is one of the 7 warlords your island will remain safe." Although the island was protected from Amazon Lily by their treaty, this could only have occurred if all of the island's residents were labeled pirates. As you can see, Amazon Lily would probably be the target of a buster call. The Marines' ultimate display of force. Should Boa Hancock's status be revoked? "What do you want, man?" Naruto turned to see 3 women emerge from the Kuja ship's mansion, which had an open door. The first was a big, fat, but muscular woman with big breasts and long, orange-brown hair that was arranged like a helmet worn by Valkyrie. She carried a big halberd and, like the others, was dressed in a long white cape and a bikini top and bottom. She was Boa Marigold, a younger sister of Boa Hancock from Marine Intelligence. The woman who came next had lime green hair, was as tall as her sister, but much thinner, and had a big head. She wore a long white cape, a green bikini, brown leather boots, and a long green stocking with the Jolly Roger on it. Her tongue, which protruded from her mouth and was forked like a snake, was another characteristic that caught the eye. She was Boa Sandersonia, the other younger sister. They left and moved aside when the third woman, Boa Hancock, the one who had spoken earlier, left. Of the three, she was the most typical of her sisters. In contrast to her younger sisters, she was tall and slender, with long black hair that hung past her waist and framed her face with locks that extended past her chin. She wore a loose sarong around her waist, exposing her long and lean legs, and, like many Kuja, she flaunted her large breasts under a revealing red blouse. She gave the Marine ship a hateful glare, primarily due to the men on board, and then turned to face the blonde Vice Admiral icily as she descended the stairs. The woman looked down sneeringly as a small kitten playing with a ball on the deck jumped on it in front of her. "Just who in the world," she said, taking another step in its direction, "would leave a kitten in my path?" To the surprise of the Marines, Hancock kicked it through the air and out of her way after it glanced over and saw her with naive eyes and a playful expression. Dazed and attempting to stand, it struck their ship's deck and rolled a couple of times. It was owned by a big Kuja who got down on her knees, picked it up, and held it to her chest before turning to face Hancock and exclaiming, "I'm so sorry, I'll take full responsibility." "Please do be more careful next time," she said, cocking her waist to the side and placing her hand on the woman's hip as she looked down at her. "Why? Yes, ma'am." The cat yowled at the person who kicked it and swung its claws weakly at her as it awoke from its daze. After crossing the deck and landing on the Yuda's head, the stunning pirate empress pointed at the Marines, causing them to turn and carry her out to them, where she stood and gazed down at them. One of the crewmen exclaimed, "That's the pirate empress," as he stared at her. "Her beauty really is unparalleled," as the woman approached and they all began to blush with love. Naruto gazed at her and said, "Boa Hancock," as the other two sisters joined her atop the serpent's head. "I'm here looking for the crew we sent to retrieve what you owe us," he said. "Remember that you also need to get the money," Toshigi said, leaning over. After nodding, Naruto said, "Yeah," and what she said. With a blank expression, Hancock said, "Those men are dead." "Really?" she whispered to him. "Yes, and I refuse to hand over the money. However, I would like to ask that you don't strip me of my position as a warlord." The men gasped, their hearts thumping in amusement. "Sorry, Naruto." "Sama!" exclaimed one of the men beside Naruto, after which he punched him over the head and knocked him face down on the deck. "Of course, Empress. Sama." Knowing that the men were all under her spell, and lusting for her beauty, she said with a gentle smile, "Also, I would also like all the valuables stored on your ship." The blonde slowed to a halt as he watched his men, including the women, begin rushing off to collect said valuables, leaving him and Toshigi standing there. Who in their right mind would agree to that? He laughed. "Stop acting like a spoiled brat." As they disappeared below deck, Toshigi, who for some reason wasn't as enamored as the others, slapped her forehead and said, "Those idiots." While others approached with chests and bags ready to be thrown over to the Kuja, the first two to return emerged from the cargo hold with a crate. However, they were abruptly taken out of their reverie by the sight of the Vice Admiral standing there with shadows over his eyes. "Ha ha ha. You guys are fucked now," Q exclaimed, pointing at them with her tail before it resumed its languid flight through the air. Q saw what had triggered him and leapt from his shoulders onto Toshigi's head, laughing as her bushy red tail waved in the air. The first one said, "What did we?" before looking down and losing all the color in his horrified face. The other two blinked and then exchanged glances. As the others rushed back down below deck to return the items, the second mirrored the expression and soon they were alone. The crate was not particularly big or attractive, and it had been opened several times already. Property of Vice Admiral Uzumaki, however, and "touch it and be charged with treason" were signs on the front of it. The first one cried out, "Please Naruto. Sama have mercy on us," as they put it down and fell to their knees, pressing their foreheads against the deck while the blonde hung over them like a furious demon. After experiencing a wave of cold terror, the three sisters twitched and took a tiny, imperceptible step back. While her sisters looked at one another and then at their own crew, Hancock gazed at the blonde who possessed this power. A few of the weaker ones had already fallen to their knees, their mouths open and their faces etched with fear, their eyes wide and unfocused. The stronger ones were trembling and breathing more heavily, but not as much as the others. With his fists clenched until the joints popped audibly, Naruto stalked slowly in the direction of the two who dared to try to give away his ramen. When they realized this, they stopped bowing and threw themselves up, landing on their asses and attempting to crawl away. The sounds of screaming, begging, sobbing, and two men getting their asses thrashed filled the air as Naruto pounced on the two and the three disappeared in a cloud of dust, so there was no point in trying to flee or begging for mercy. All of the Kuja's perspiration stopped, but they were able to breathe normally once more as the frightful sensation abruptly disappeared. The two Marines were tied upside down to the mast, beaten black and blue, their underwear pulled up and hooked over their heads, and Naruto stood beside the mast, clapping the dust from his hands as the cloud of comic dust disappeared. They nodded slowly as he said, "Now I hope you two have learned your lesson, next time I won't be so nice." The first one wheezed out, his face swollen, and the second one looked equally awful. "Yes, Naruto. Sama," he said. He turned back to Hancock, moved to stand directly in front of her, and cleared his throat before saying, "Sorry about that. Now, back to what I was saying. Seeing as my first objective is complete, now I'm going to need what you owe the Marines, 10% of your wealth." After appearing to consider this, Hancock sat down on the Yuta's head and crossed her legs in a sensual manner. In frustration, Naruto crossed his arms and said, "It is either that or your position as a Shichibukai will be taken. Make up your mind. This is your last chance." Looking down her nose at the blonde, she thought, "I like being one of the warlords. I do not wish to forsake that position, however, I despise the world government. Tell me, man." She spat the word, but she gave him a smug little smile. "What do you think of this?" she asked, looking at him. "The Marines who came to contact me all got involved in a mysterious accident at sea and died after they were all turned to stone." As the Marines who had finally returned flinched and prepared their weapons, drawing their swords and gripping their guns more tightly, Naruto inclined his head to the side. Tashigi kept her katana close to her chest while standing farther behind Naruto, Q perched on her shoulder. "Stay on your guard," a man said to the others. "I once heard about a ship that had been attacked by the Kuja pirates and heard that all the people on that ship had turned into creepy statues." "Cute story, but you should really stop acting like such a spoiled brat," Naruto said, laughing as he looked down and shook his head at his men's terrified behavior. As she leaned forward to gaze at the blonde, Sandersonia chuckled and said, "Our elder sister's personality is terrible, but she always gets what she wants." "Indeed," Marigold replied, "and there is a reason why she always gets what she wants." "Do you know why that is?" Hancock smirked as she cocked her hip to the side and placed her hand on the Yuta's head, uncrossing her legs and sliding down it before landing in front of Naruto on the marine ship. "No matter what I do, even if I were to kick a kitten, even if I were to kill that fox, even if I were to kill a person, the world would forgive me for it, because I am beautiful," she said. Hearts thumping in their eyes, the Kuja squealed like adoring children for their empress. When Naruto punched the nearest marine upside the head, it set off a chain reaction that knocked them all down like bowling pins. The Marines all reacted similarly, chanting that they had forgiven her. With a smug grin, Hancock flipped her hair back over her shoulders and hummed, "Sinful hearts that long for me," before extending her arms and forming a heart with them. "May your bodies harden," she said. Marrow. Marrow. The crack of a gunshot sounded through the air, stopping the Snake Princess in her tracks. "Sister." When Hancock's younger siblings witnessed the blonde man shoot a gun at close range, they let out a scream. The bullet had just missed her face and had broken the small ring holding the snake to the piercing, leaving her completely unharmed but damaging her earring, so Hancock stopped and reached up to her ear, where a pair of golden snake earrings hung low from her earlobe, or she did have two. "It's a good thing that you're so close," Naruto said as he continued to aim the firearm. "Normally I use throwing knives, but I've decided to use this instead. Now, I'm getting annoyed with your games. Hand over what you owe and we'll be on our way." She gazed at him in disbelief. Not only had he not been swayed by her beauty, but he had even threatened her by shooting at her, something no one had ever dared to do before. "I'll wait here. You got until tomorrow afternoon to return with the money or I'm leaving and the treaty is off," Naruto said with a charming smile as he lowered the gun. "Are you okay, sister?" Hancock dismissed her sister's query with a wave. As they departed back towards the island at their sister's command, Marigold glared at the nearby marine ship, saying, "How dare that man, he should pay for this." Putting a hand to her chest and ignoring her younger sister's tirade, she asked herself, "What is this strange feeling in my heart?" as she made her way back to her ship's mansion. As they left the calm belt and made their way back to Marineford, Tashigi muttered loudly, "I can't believe we got through all that without any more problems." They had a number of chests, bags, and crates full of treasure that were securely kept in the ship's cargo hold. While Q, still the size of a newborn kid, complained about not being able to fight those snakes from her position in Tashigi's hair, Naruto glanced around and noticed a few sailors going about their daily business without being instructed. When the blonde turned from the treasure pile to the young woman, he said, "Well, time to go back and take the kids home." By calling the crew his children, he yelled in jest. "You are aware that some of the crew members are as old as you are, aren't you?" When he put his arms around her and cried in a mocking tone, she squeaked and deadpanned. "They mature so quickly." She turned around to avoid him seeing her flushed face after he released his hold. He laughed. I'm going to head on up and check to make sure that we're on course. Toshigi. Chan, be a dear and finish taking an inventory of what we got. Yes, sir, she nodded, her face still blazing red. As Naruto left, snickering all the way, Q leapt off the girl's head and ran after him. When Naruto got back to Marineford, he ordered his crew to retrieve all of Hancock's treasure and transport it to the proper location for processing and storage while being watched over. But something was missing. Nobody seemed to notice that there was no longer an even smaller chest in one of the chests. I hope you like it, Naruto-kun, Q said joyfully, laughing to herself as she pushed the tiny chest beneath Naruto's bunk with her head. She wanted nothing more than to please him and protect him ever since he rescued her from that horrible life on that island. Since he would always do something potentially dangerous, like shoot at that snake woman and attack a Sea King head on, she knew that the last part would be difficult because of who he is. She reasoned that she should assist him in becoming stronger since she couldn't be there to try to protect him all the time. She smelled something familiar as they were going through the treasure, but she chose to keep quiet about it for the time being and wait until nightfall to see for herself. Her ability to change size made it simple for her to sneak into the cargo hold, where she sniffed out the object. She had opened the right chest with her tail and discovered another half hidden beneath some paper money and gold. She couldn't open it, though, because it had been locked. She was reminded of the fruit that had bestowed these abilities by the potent scent. Since she essentially stole it from the Marines to give to Naruto, she was unsure of what he would say or do if he found out. Thus, she took it and concealed it, moving it cautiously every night until she was able to get it into his room. He had a desk, one of those standing closets, a dresser, a few chairs scattered about, and finally his bed, but that was about as far as he could hide it. Fortunately for her, however, he had purchased one of those pet beds, which she had tucked beneath his bed about a year ago and essentially forgotten about since she started sharing his bed every night, where it was considerably warmer. She pulled the little pet bed in front of the small chest and began to crawl back out, pushing it as far as she could. She just needed to figure out how to give it to him without making a scene now that she had it. She jumped when the room's door loudly opened, slamming her head against the wooden slats beneath the bed and swearing. As Naruto heard her curse and noticed the fox's butt sticking out from beneath his bed, he said, "Q, what's wrong?" She scurried out and rubbed a bump on her head, saying, Nothing, just hit my head is all." "As long as you're okay, I guess," he thought after glancing at her for a moment before grabbing his wallet from the top of his dresser and saying, "We're going out again in the morning and I'm about to go pick some stuff up, you want to come?" No, I'm fine with staying here," she said, shaking her head. "But will you pick me up some of my favorite snacks again?" she said, laughing feebly. After giving her a brief glance, the blonde said, "You're acting weird," and made her perspire. "Did you do something? You got another fox in here?" Her sweat disappeared. Of course not, no garden. Verity Fox could ever hope to measure up to this vixen. He laughed. Yeah, don't get a kink in your tail, I'm just messing with you." She sighed in relief as she waited for him to go. Although she didn't think he would be upset with her for taking that chest for him, she hoped they were already at sea if he did discover it. If they were here at Marineford, or at least out at sea, his first instinct would be to give it to that strange guy Dr. Vegapunk. He would listen to her arguments and maybe be persuaded by her. As they strolled through the market near Marineford's civilian docks, Toshigi sighed, "How do you ever convince me into coming shopping with you?" On the island, there were 3 military docks. The main one, which was right in front of the tower and connected to the base, and the other 2, which were behind the tower. The docks were strategically constructed to be able to deploy and assist another dock, creating a nearly perfect triangle of defense, as can be seen if one were to draw a line connecting them all on a map. However, a second harbor was constructed for civilian use, where merchant ships and fishermen could dock and unload their catch. Naruto hummed, "Because you love shopping," and nodded to those around him. His capture of Gold D. Roger years ago had made him a hero to many, and even now, Marine families would nod and wave to him. Some kids even tried to be like him. Besides Toshigi. "Chan, I said I'd buy you something nice. So what would you like? A new sword, clothes, shoes?" he asked, rubbing his chin in contemplation. Observing that she was glancing around and not really paying attention, he grinned and said, "How about a new bathing suit or maybe even some sexy new lingerie?" She blushed as she heard him say, "Well, this isn't a place for joking like that." As she held her sword up and brought it down on his head, he laughed and said, "So you admit that you like the idea? Maybe when we get back to the ship we can. Hey, what are you doing with that?" She cracked the case without bothering the blonde. "OWW, Toshigi. Chan, what did you hit me for?" For being perverted, she turned away, trying to sound angry as she blushed at the idea of them going back to his ship, kicking Q out of his room, locking the door to his quarters, showing him her underwear, and doing a lot more. "Ah, Naruto. Sama, my case is cracked, can we stop by the Naruto? Sama?" she asked, looking around when she noticed that her sword's case was cracked. She almost felt bad for hitting him so hard, but then she remembered that he could handle worse. They shopped some more, getting anything they might need for their next trip after dropping her sword off to have the case fixed and the blade sharpened while it was there. Since the base didn't include ramen in the regular rations they provided them, they naturally ordered an entire crate of it, as he usually did. In order to address that, he used his own funds to purchase enough ramen to last him, much like Garp did when he purchased an abundance of donuts and other snacks. He also gave his crew the option to bring their own food if they didn't want what the ship's cook was serving, and they were free to do so if they wanted to spend the money. Her favorite thing about him was that despite his strength, he was a good man and he interrupted her thought process by holding up a pair of seemingly ordinary gray sweatpants and saying, "Hey Tashigi-chan, don't you need some new training sweats?" "Yes, thank you Naruto. Sama," she said, nodding. The words, "Foxy Girl," were printed across the back, directly over her ass, but she didn't need to know that just yet, so he folded them up and smiled at her. Before departing, she matched his smile as they paid for them and accepted the bag. "So, what are we doing this time? Another assignment like last time?" she asked. In response to her inquiry, he shook his head. "Not this time actually. I've heard some rumors about a friend of mine getting into some trouble, something about being corrupt and stealing money from the base he commanded," he said, his smile turning serious as he said, "I don't believe it for 1 minute, he's not that kind of person. I'm going there to question him myself and find out what's going on." "Where?" "A marine base out in the East Blue, stationed by a small town on Shell Island." After a few days, Naruto arrived at Shell Island, where the crew was divided into shifts to sail day and night. Before his marines could even grab the gangplank to disembark, Naruto leapt from the ship and onto the harbor. Tashigi walked down the gangplank after it was up, while Q followed his lead by jumping and landing gracefully on the wooden dock directly next to him. Q then stretched out and yawned. She asked softly as she adjusted her glasses, "So this is Shell Island, huh?" Naruto looked at her and hummed at the oddly sexier than normal clothes she was wearing. As usual, her jeans hugged her thighs and butt, but they were much lower than normal. He was certain that he would have seen her underwear if it weren't for her flowery shirt. Finally, she was wearing her fur-collared jean coat. "Half of you stay with the ship, the other half will come with us. No wandering around the town until I give the okay, got it?" he said, nodding in response to her question before turning to face the Marines getting off the ship and waiting for orders. They gave a salute. "Good, now I'm sure that I don't have to warn you, but I will anyway. If I catch you screwing around, you'll end up like those 2 idiots tied up in the crow's nest." Sweat fell from their eyes. Because of their stench, he had them tied to the ship's bow like figureheads and gave them a day-long shower of salt water to clean them up. He still hadn't forgiven those 2 for trying to give away his ramen. He then told them that they would have to be fed by a crewmate every day for the next 2 weeks as part of their punishment, which would involve them sitting there and reflecting on their transgressions. The blonde thought, "Speaking of which, you can let them loose now, it's been long enough," before turning and walking down the wooden dock toward Shell Village, which was appropriately named and situated between them and the marine base. He raised an eyebrow toward the end when he spotted a small boat with just 1 mast and sail. Surely no one sailed around in that little thing? A slender young man with a scar beneath one eye, dressed in blue jeans and a red vest, with a straw hat on his head and a pair of basic flip-flops on his feet, sneezed, "Achoo," as he walked down the street in Shell Village. "Luffy, are you okay?" his partner, a younger child with pink hair and round glasses, asked him. Luffy looked down at the boy half his height and rubbed his nose, saying, "Yeah, just a sneeze. Nothing to worry about, Kobe. Now let's go talk to Zoro again." Naruto frowned as he walked through Shell Village, followed by half of the Marines under his direct command. "Tashigi-chan, am I ugly or scary looking?" he asked. She responded, perplexed by the unexpected question, "No, why would you ask that?" "Look at the villagers, I see, but why are they afraid of us?" she asked, observing that although there were people out and about, they were staring at them with fear and terror. A young girl screaming from a sidewalk, "Just leave us alone," glared at them. "Honey, no, don't do that, you'll get in trouble," the little girl's mother said, pale, grabbing her by the arm before bowing to them. "Please sir, I'm so sorry for what she said to you, please forgive us," she said. Before heading towards the base with his cape flapping behind him, Naruto turned and muttered ominously, "Tashigi-chan, I have a pretty good idea of what's going on. Come along, if I'm right then we got some ass to kick," he said. When he reached the center of the village, further into the island, he heard a woman scream, followed by a growl and more terrified voices. From around a corner, a grating voice exclaimed, "Move, move, make room for my adorable pet." As he turned the corner, he stopped and scowled at what he saw. A mature wolf was growling and snapping at anyone who approached, frightening children and anyone else who got too close. The villagers were fleeing. However, behind it, he noticed a blond man in an orange shirt and black suit walking with a sword slung over his shoulder and grinning cockily as a few Marines trailed behind him. The man looked at the terrified crowd and chuckled, saying, "Move, anyone in the way of my pet will be executed by my father, Captain Morgan." "Okay, I've seen enough. Q, take care of it." Naruto glared as he watched the wolf leap on a man and growl at the yelling individual. "With pleasure," the vixen said with a laugh. The younger blonde man and the Marines stationed at the island were shocked when the small fox, which had grown to the size of a miniature horse, sped towards the menacing wolf and tackled it. The wolf yelled and tried to flee as blood spilled onto the ground as Q's claws easily sliced through it and her jaws closed around its throat. Only a few seconds passed, and then there was a loud crunch, and the wolf went limp, its neck crushed in the big vixen's strong jaws. As Q mangled the wolf by tearing its throat out in a spray of blood, the blonde with the odd hairstyle cried out in terror, "W. W. What the hell is that thing? Men, shoot it." "I wouldn't do that if I were you, daddy's boy. Who thinks that they can talk to me like that?" the man yelled, despite what he had just witnessed, before he saw Naruto and his crew standing there. "You Marines, who do you think you are?" Naruto and the men who accompanied him laughed, and Q trotted over, licking the blood on her muzzle. "You dare have your thing kill my pet, I'll have you killed. Just you wait until my father hears about this." The man fled in the direction of the base. He made fun of him and said, "Come on, let's not keep daddy waiting," before making his way to the base. "Okay. Something is seriously fucked up around here," he muttered as he arrived at the base and cocked his head to the side when he saw the alarm was going off. Then he turned to face Tashigi and said, "Tashigi-chan, take the men and find out what the hell is going on here." "What about you?" she asked, nodding. "I'm going to find my friend. I trust you to do the right thing." It was easy enough to enter the base, and since there were no guards to question him or anything, he went down to the prison area and proceeded to the holding cells, all of which except one were empty. Naruto, "Hey Iruka. Sensei, never thought I'd see you behind bars," said the blonde as she approached the cell with a smile. Naruto stood at the prison cell door, examining the man in front of him. His long graying brown hair, which had been spiky and sticking straight out of his head, was now dirty and hung down to his neck. He had pulled it back into a low ponytail. The scar across his now wrinkled face gave him away. It was the telltale scar that defined the now over 50-year-old man. His skin was pale, a far cry from the tanned man he once knew. Naruto-kun. Iruka groaned and grinned as he got up from the little cot he had been sitting on. "Look at you," he said, laughing. "I'm still your sensei even though it's been years since you were a student at the academy. I told you once, kid, that I can't teach you anything else, and you're my superior now." As he tapped the bars between them, Naruto smirked and said, "Well, apparently you still got something to teach me, eh? What happened?" "That bastard Morgan," Iruka snorted, huffing as he sat down roughly, "framed me for embezzling and some other bullshit. You know me, kid. You know I wouldn't do something like that." Iruka turned away and scoffed, limping back to his cot. The man grinned as Naruto nodded and said, "Yeah, I know sensei, but don't worry, I'll set things straight for you. But first, let's get you out of this cell," he said. Before the locking mechanism malfunctioned and the cell door opened by itself, Haki flowed into it from Naruto's hands. With a little laugh, Iruka slapped his forehead and said, "Brat, you haven't changed at all. The keys were right over there." "Oh," he said, turning his head to see the big key ring gleaming mockingly from a hook. "Oh well, it doesn't matter, it's the thought that counts, but listen, I'll wait here until everything dies down. I'm not as young as I once was. This old Marine will just have to leave the fighting to you young ones." Naruto grinned and said, "Damn Iruka, you've gotten so weak and old." His head bounced off a tin cup. "What did you say, you idiot? Drop and give me TWENNTY. I'm a Vice Admiral, Captain Iruka. I should be telling you to do push-ups," Naruto said, halting his push-up routine on the 15th and asking, "Wait a minute," before leaping back up. "You wouldn't tell an old man like me to do that now, would you?" the man asked in jest before becoming serious. "Look, a week or so back, I heard some of the Marines talking. They got some young swordsmen tied to a post in the execution yard because of Morgan's spoiled son Helmeppo," he said. "Blonde hair. Kinda looks like a watermelon. Whines a lot and hides behind daddy all the time? Was Naruto's response to the name, which made him sniffle. Iruka replied, yeah, well the guy is innocent, so don't let him be punished for something he didn't do. Now hurry and go kick some ass for me, I'll wait here. What the hell was that? Iruka cried as they looked around after hearing a big object smash and then a slight tremble in the ground. I have no idea, but I plan to find out. Naruto looked around and arched an eyebrow as he stepped out onto the execution field. The field was a wide open space with high stone walls on three sides and hard, dry, grassless soil surrounding it like a makeshift desert. In the middle of the field, on the far side, was a wooden post embedded in the ground, with another piece of wood protruding from the sides in the shape of a cross. The Marines who were stationed there were lying all over the field, most of them bruised and some cut, but the main attraction was the base commander, Captain Axehand Morgan, or rather, the soon-to-be former captain. Naruto. Sama? He turned to see Tashigi running over as some of the men were holding Morgan's son in chains and yelling that they should be put to death for mistreating him. Oh, please stop talking already. With a furious expression on his face, one of the men screamed before striking Helmeppo in the stomach, knocking him out cold. When he realized what he had done, he turned to face Naruto, knowing that he would face consequences for his actions. You understand the rules, don't you? Naruto asked the man. Why? Yes sir, the man said, as if he were trying to withdraw. You are aware that striking a prisoner who is already under our custody could land you in some major trouble, aren't you? He gave a nod. Don't do it again, that's your warning, but next time take the cuffs off, then hit him, the blonde said, turning away. Everyone's perspiration stopped. So, Naruto. Sama, what do we do? I have some of the men going through the base files. I thought that it'd be a good start, the woman said, surveying the area. Good thinking, Tashigi-chan, but first things first, disarm Captain Morgan and have him imprisoned, then have someone get Captain Iruka out of the holding cells so that he can get looked over by a medic. He nodded, telling her that was all he wanted her to do. Then, turning to face a man who was doing nothing, he said, you, return to the ship and bring me my Denmushi. Then he noticed something and turned to look around, and could someone tell me where Q got off to? After leaving the base and following the scent back into town, Q, still the size of a small horse, quickly returned to Shell Village, oblivious to the terrified looks she received as she passed. Q sniffed the ground and the air around her, following her nose in search of the divine scent that permeated the air. She eventually approached a small restaurant and trotted inside before noticing something that smelled so divine, a rice ball, or onigiri, of all things, but the filling smelled like cooked rabbit. She was so overcome by the aroma that she practically floated over, frightening a man as she approached and slowly reaching out to taste it. No. Before striking her with the broom and waking the vixen from her reverie, a young girl screamed. Oh. The fox yelled before receiving another slap, saying, hey, you little brat, stop it. The broom clattered loudly to the floor as the little brown girl with her hair in two pigtails yelled and fell back, frightening everyone not just with its size but also with its newfound ability to speak. Why? You spoke. How can you? She exclaimed, gesturing to the vixen. For the girl and the other nearby villagers, Q's smile was an odd sight. How? Of course, I ate a devil fruit. Actually, with her fear gone, she cried out, what can you do? Aside from talking, I can change my size and become much stronger and faster, but I usually just let my master, Vice Admiral Naruto, that blonde guy in the big white coat and white suit you yelled at earlier, fight. The entire village quickly learned that the newest arrival was, in fact, a Vice Admiral of the Marines, and a well-known and feared one at that, Vice Admiral Naruto Uzumaki, who was feared by pirates because of his unofficial status as a marine pirate hunter and praised by many for defeating the Pirate King Gold D. Roger at the young age of 16. Well, we're glad we left, isn't that right, Zoro? Zoro, a slightly older and taller teen than Luffy, was dressed in a white shirt, dark pants with matching boots, and a green waistband that held his 3 swords. Luffy laughed as he and his new first mate prepared the boat to depart. No kidding, he said. We just got out of trouble with Morgan and we don't need to run into a Vice Admiral of all things. Let's just hurry up and get out of here, he said as the swordsman grimaced as they spotted a marine ship a few docks over. They both climbed into the boat and prepared, leaving only the rope that tied the boat to the dock. Oh, a voice said, going out so quickly? Both inexperienced pirates turned and saw the last thing they ever wanted to see. On the dock near where they tied the mooring line, the line that prevents the boats from drifting away, a blond man with blue eyes and 3 scars on each cheek, dressed in a white suit and a marine greatcoat, sat on a 2-foot tall metal stool-like object. Zoro, who was prepared to fight at any time, reached slowly for one of his swords. Seeing this, Naruto waved it away, saying, "Calm down, I won't fight you." After questioning the Marines stationed here, we discovered that Morgan had used force to take over after framing the previous captain. Taking the mooring line in his hand, he unwrapped the noose from the stool and threw it into the boat with them. "But listen here, Monkey D. Luffy, you should listen to your grandfather and stop this pirate business," he said. "He's ruled this island like a tyrant and killed anyone who opposed him, and you very well may have saved many lives today." "How do you know my name?" Luffy blinked. "Another time, but I'm serious, we don't owe you anything anymore," Naruto grinned. "If you're still a pirate, I probably won't be so nice the next time I find you. Finally, your little friend Kobe sends his best wishes. He wanted to say goodbye, but he's currently a little busy getting fitted for his new uniform." "So he made it into the Marines?" the rubber teen asked with a big smile. Before turning to leave, Naruto shook his head and told the younger man, "He's not ready to officially join yet, but he will be. Good luck, kid, next time I see you, you'll probably need it," he said. After 2.5 months, Tashigi sighed as she stood on Naruto's ship's deck and glanced around, only to discover that she was standing close to the bow, where the blonde would usually be sitting in his lawn chair when he wasn't working. Naruto-kun. What's taking so long? Before approaching the lawn chair, she muttered to herself, "You should be back already." They had stayed for an additional week after the ordeal on Shell Island until things had returned to normal and some additional Marines had arrived after being reassigned to the base and placed under the command of Captain Iruka, who had been exonerated of all charges due to evidence they had found in Morgan's files. However, Naruto himself took them back to Marineford and placed them on reserve until further notice. He didn't give her a direct response when she asked why, but he did tell her that he would be taking Q with him and that the trip wouldn't last longer than a month or two. However, those 2 months had already passed and he hadn't returned. Despite her knowledge that he was safe, she couldn't help but feel bad and wonder what he was doing. After all, when you witness someone take cannonballs to the head thrown by Vice Admiral Garp of all people, you start to believe that they are indestructible. Even the majority of the Marines had never seen the enigmatic Dr. Vegapunk before, who was the world's foremost expert in the study of sea stone and other fields. "Are we finished yet, man? I've been doing this for hours, don't you have enough data by now?" Naruto sighed as he knelt on one knee, his tank top sticking to his body as perspiration ran down his face and neck. Vegapunk, an elderly man in a long lab coat over a striped shirt, with goggles over his eyes and long yellow gloves on his hands, looked up and grinned. "I guess so," he thought, rubs his gloved hand over his wild white hair, and says, "Sorry about that, it's just that I've never dreamed of seeing such a marvelous devil fruit in action." Shortly after leaving Shell Island, Naruto recalled that Q had shown him a small locked chest that, to his surprise, contained one of the treasures of the sea, a legendary devil fruit. After much argument, she eventually persuaded him to eat it, but not before he came to Vegapunk to learn what it could do to him. He didn't want to eat it and end up killing someone when he tried to learn what it did on his own. Following days of testing, the doctor told him it was a paramecia, which is a type of devil fruit that is both more common and rarer than most. Some paramecia types could give the user superhuman physical abilities or powers, while others could change the characteristics of their body or surroundings. Finally, some types allowed the user to manipulate and produce various substances. However, he had to learn the hard way that this one was different. As it turns out, he ate a legendary devil fruit called the storm fruit, which, as the name suggests, gave him power over storms. The doctor had him stay in a secure area and eat the fruit, which tasted awful, and after choking it all down with tears almost streaming down his face, he passed out and woke up feeling strange. According to Vegapunk's calculations, or perhaps just a clever guess, he would be able to control not only storms but also water, wind, and lightning if he practiced. During the next 2 months, he trained while the doctor examined him like a lab rat, asking him to repeat some of his attacks so he could take notes. He quickly discovered that his wind and lightning powers were far more powerful than his water because of the effects of seawater on users like him, but he could still manipulate them just not as well as the others, even though they seemed to work on fresh water just fine, perhaps because fresh water doesn't contain salt. He said to the elderly scientist, "I've been away long enough, Doc. I have to return to my crew and resume my work. I'll see you some other time." Before leaving the blonde to reveal himself, Vegapunk waved absently while reviewing the large pile of notes he had taken. "See y'all later, kid."
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.